I was named after the state I was born in, Virginia. And our dad worked for
Oh,
NASA. That was his first job after getting his PhD. And so we were living in Virginia, and they didn't know very many American names. My dad got the job offer at Purdue, so we were in Lafayette
mhm.
all the way till 1984. So from 1948 to 1984, our parents lived in Lafayette. My parents were the first Chinese to buy a house in West Lafayette,
Oh, wow.
and they were blackballed in several neighborhoods
Mhm.
because they were Chinese. So he couldn't buy a house in some neighborhoods. We did buy a house near West Lafayette High School. Our fathers both went to Tsinghua University in China during the war. Tsinghua University fled from Beijing to Kunming
Mhm,
because the Japanese invaded China.
mhm.
And so they were both in Kunming together. And my dad borrowed Uncle Shu's suit for his wedding. That was before Bethy and I were born. But our two families have had a long path together. So after they came to the US, they both ended up as professors at Purdue. So our two families have not only interesting stories, but they're really tied together. The Shu family has made incredible contributions to science and technology. The youngest daughter is Bethy and my best friend. Frank Shu is the most famous of the Shu family. I mean, the father was famous too. And my father was instrumental in aeronautical engineering at Purdue. He taught Neil Armstrong and many of the astronauts. Yeah,
Really?
yeah, yeah.
I learned something new today. That's so cool.
I visited last summer the relatively new aeronautical engineering building,
Mhm,
and there's a named uh, professorship for my dad. I
mhm.
met the woman professor who holds that seat. She was really cool. There's lots of plaques with our dad and
Wow.
Uncle Sue's names on it.
Growing up here, I didn't really see myself in my history book. So part of me just wants to see what I can do to include our stories into history. When the elder generation passes, then some of those stories get lost.
My parents were one of the very early Chinese to come to Purdue,
Mhm.
but there are many incredible Chinese who have contributed to science and engineering and even business at Purdue. One of my mom's cousins was also a genius. He was a world bridge champion, a world chess champion, went back to Taiwan and became president of Tsinghua University
Oh,
there.
wow.
Do you know about Tsinghua University?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
That's kind of the MIT of China.
Mm.
And there's the one in Taiwan that fled there after the communists took over from the mainland, and there's one in mainland also. And I've taught there at the one in mainland and the one in Taiwan. I've taught at both. I don't know much about the history of Chinese in Indiana who were like laundry or restaurant. We were all in that academic, educated world.
The way I see it is like history is today's story, and today's story is tomorrow's history. So what I hope to capture is the sense of Asians have their stories here in Indiana. They're real fleshed out people, and not just like a character in a movie, but
Uh-huh.
we have our lives and we have our emotions. Like this sounds really silly, but I didn't know um, that there would be another Chinese American artist
From
from
West Lafayette.
Indiana, from West Lafayette. That was just like the biggest shock to me that I found Beth, and there's someone before me that is in the same profession and the same field. And there's just a huge comfort in that. Growing up, I didn't know that there was so many Asian Americans. After high school, then I went to Taiwan to learn Chinese. And then I met all these other Asian American kids from different states and Canadian Chinese. And then all of a sudden I was like, whoa, why are there so many of us?
Oh, it's huge, really.
Yeah,
I
it's
think
huge. But
Chinese family camp was really important for Bethy and me and all our cousins and friends for what you're saying, connecting with people who were exactly like us, because in West Lafayette, there weren't so many when Bethy and I were growing up. And then we suddenly found this huge community of kids that were just like us. I think it's canceled this year because of COVID
yeah,
19.
yeah.
Beth, she doesn't like Chinese family camp as much as I do.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I'm
What
the one
is
who
that?
kept them. I think I just stuck a little more close to our Chinese roots, and she was kind of
Mhm.
out there being an artist and moving out to Montana. That was like, whoa, Montana. She's a little more adventurous, looking away from home for excitement, and I was more of the homebody. And as an older sister, I had to take care of everybody.
So my dad came to the US for grad school in University of Maryland. And then after grad school, he came to Purdue for his PhD in
Okay.
aeronautical and aerospace engineering.
Wow.
And then when he was there, he had this part-time job, and then the part-time job turned into a full-time job. For a lot of my childhood, he would be traveling for like a month at a time. So majority of the time, it's like my mom raising me and my sister. My sister is 4 years older than me. I always looked up to her when I was younger, and I would want to do everything that she did. The reason why I'm like so into drawing is also because my sister, she would draw notebooks filled with dolls. And
We have to compare our notebooks of drawings because that's what Bethy and I did all the time. And I have some examples. We draw these beauty queen contests.
we come up with like the fashion, and each
Uh-huh.
doll had a name.
We did similar.
I guess what's a little bit different is like we would often go to Taiwan for the summers. So we get a connection with our grandparents and the relatives there. When I was a kid, I would feel embarrassed about my parents having a Chinese accent. But my mom, she knows that it's hard for us being minorities here. And back then, so it was like in the 90s, there's only like a handful of Asians. Like there's some, but we're definitely the minority. We have this shadow puppet show that my mom created. She would take it into our elementary school classes like every single year and go present it to our classmates to present to them Chinese food and Chinese New Year tradition, the holiday, and Chinese decorations. So I grew up kind of doing that with her, present our Chinese culture to the non-Chinese people and how to bridge this intercultural relationship.
I can't believe it was still an issue in the 90s that there weren't very many Chinese families in West Lafayette. Because obviously we were growing up in the 50s. That's 40 years earlier.
Yeah,
How could it not have changed more, huh?
There is, like, I thought it was really multicultural in the sense that we had Global Fest and Food Bazaar. Like, there's starting to be like these multicultural festivals, which is really good. I think it has to do with like the authority figures being all white, like 95% white. There's still that feeling like we're minorities, and maybe it's because my parents are first generation here. In our family we speak Chinese, and so for me it's really confusing. Chinese, Taiwanese at home, but then at outside is completely different world. It just feels really conflicting because it's two very different cultures.
No, that's a definite phenomenon for our Chinese Americans.
Yeah, and nowadays some of the students that I've taught, they're also Asian American. They have it a lot better. It's multicultural, but there's also more Asians in their classrooms. And so interacting with people from different cultures and countries, that feels super natural to us. But then you're still faced with the idea that you have an Asian face, and if I'm going to like Walmart or supermarket, people often assume that I'm an international student or like foreigner in my own hometown. Those are just many instances that have made me feel uncomfortable growing up. And it's not upfront racist or like violent. All these people are really friendly, but it just still makes you feel uncomfortable that they assume that you're not from here because of your face.
I think that's maybe always going to be true.
It might be. I do think that things are changing and things are getting better, because even the time that I've been here, and maybe it has to do with the things that we were doing, like promoting culture and helping educate people, that people are more and more open to understand and accept different cultures.
It's great that you and your sister speak Chinese, because in our family, I pretty moderately, I'm not fluent, but I can speak quite well, and I can read and write to a certain extent. Like I use WeChat to communicate with our cousins in China, and I write in Chinese.
Oh, wow.
But Bethy cannot. She can speak some, but she can't read and write. I stayed more interested in our Chinese heritage, and I went to University of Michigan, and I started in math, but he ended up in Chinese language and literature. And I went to Stanford in that field, but then I switched to computer science later. My husband and I, Caucasian husband, we went to Taiwan and lived for 2 years, and then it really improved my Chinese. Our son married a Chinese woman, And so our grandchildren are 3/4 Chinese, but they all took a trip to Taiwan because her parents were from Taiwan last Christmas.
Mhm.
And
Can they speak?
our grandson started taking Chinese. He's only 7, and he was really picking it up fast, but he got too busy. So there, he may have picked up some. My son and daughter cannot. They just know some baby words and food words. A difference between your parents and your generation and my parents and our generation. My parents deliberately spoke English to us because they were afraid of the discrimination against us.
Oh, wow.
So that they were afraid if we spoke English with a Chinese accent or if we didn't speak English well, that we would really be discriminated against. So they deliberately spoke English to us, which was a shame.
But I think being bilingual growing up, it impacts our language learning. Recently been cleaning the house and a lot of like old papers, and I came across this preschool parent-teacher journal that they were passing back and forth. I didn't realize that this existed. But the teacher was like observing us kids, and then she wrote a few things like they're learning English as a second language, and so we're really working on them with pronunciation. So her name is Maureen, but we just call her Marie. And then we realized that, oh, that's because my mom would pronounce it that way. She wrote, Tracey is learning her English from her sister. We really have to work on Tiffany's pronunciation to make it
Wow,
better.
interesting. Wow.
And for me, it's like English has been my main language for a long time, that I don't remember that time when English was a second language to us.
Yeah.
A lot of things that we do, I realized maybe does root into this Asian family dynamics. The teacher wrote on her sheet that said, Tiffany doesn't like playing with the kids like at gym class when there's like a big group, but like if she's just in the classroom, she's perfectly fine playing with like one other kid. When I read that, I'm like, I was like that as a kid too. For me, it was more like when I talked and someone like criticized me or someone said something that hurt my feelings, then I didn't want to talk anymore. So I just became like mute. I had a really hard time interacting with other people. In high school, I was involved in Girl Scouts. I was the only Asian girl. Well, there's one other Indian girl who was in the group, but I always felt so uncomfortable. And at the time, I didn't like it because it was just such a different environment for me.
I had the same Girl Scout experience. I was the only Chinese girl in the group. I was really shy and I didn't like it. And when we go camping, it was like, no, it was so awful, but I just kept going to it. Somebody came in to do sort of a beauty analysis of all the girls in the Girl Scout troop. And they didn't know what to do with me because they couldn't type me like Grace Kelly. They told each girl like what movie star type they were. And they were like stuck because they couldn't interpret this Chinese figure. Anyways, I remember that really clearly. Just feeling kind of weird, and out of place.
Yeah, out of place. I think that's a really good word to describe it. But afterwards now, I'm super grateful for that experience because it introduced me to volunteering and helping out in the community.
You can see it in our books. Family is the most important thing, and that Chinese family feeling is something that's deep in my soul.